Tell me about the Depression, Dad.
What do you want to hear about it?
Just how'd you survive?
Well, back in the Depression, I guess I was about 4 years old at the time. We lived in Cleveland, Tennessee. And the railroad yard, you went across the street and down a bank and jumped a little branch, and there was the railroad yard. There was tracks spread out for 100 yards across there. And my daddy and my uncle would go down there at night when the trains would come through there, and he'd be there overnight. Maybe it'd have a load of chickens on it. Well, my Uncle Bill, my daddy's older brother, my daddy, and sometimes they'd take me along to teach me the trade, if you know what I mean. My daddy'd sharpen his knife about 30 minutes before we went down there. We waited dark to go, because if the railroad man saw them, they'd run them off.
That's a train bull, right?
So
they're called the train bulls?
Yeah, train bull. That's what they call it.
Yep.
Here comes the bull.
Mm-hmm.
And Daddy would, those little slats were about that far. There's a place, I guess, about like that, so to get plenty of air in there and chickens wouldn't die of heat. And he'd carve a hole out with his pocket knife big enough to slip an egg through, because they laid hundreds of eggs. And Uncle Bill would take them, put him a hook on a wire and reach back in there and slide them over the hole. My daddy'd get them. They'd usually get a dozen or so a night, so we could have breakfast the next morning. Then sometimes we'd go down there at night when a coal train had come through there, bouncing coal off on the tracks. We'd go down there and pick up coal and put them in them bags so we could stay warm the next day or two. So things was kind of rough during the Depression, but I didn't know it. I thought that's just the way life was.
Tell me about some of your Army shooting.
My what, Army shooting?
Yeah.
Man, I was in basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. We was on the range, and then we'd fired all day, and this buddy of mine, we'd pull targets all day long. And we thought we weren't going to have to fire, but they called me and him up at the last minute and said we had to fire, so this sergeant handed us one round apiece, and we fired. And I hit the bullseye almost dead center. And so he said, "That's a good shot, Hughes." He's handed me a 8-round clip, and I put that in my rifle. He said, "Lock and load," and I shoved.
Was it M1?
M1 rifle. I shoved one in the chamber, and he said, "Now knock that little wooden peg right through that marker." They had little markers about so big. They were white. The bullseye was black. The markers about like that and had a stick in it. So you'd shoot your first shot, and they'd take that marker and stick it in the bullet hole so they'd know where you hit. So the sergeant told me, he said, "Now I want you to push that little stick, that peg, through the same hole." So when I pulled the trigger on that sucker, that marker just dropped straight down in front of the target, and he called down and asked this warrant officer where that second shot on target number 15 hit. And he said he pushed the peg through the hose. So he turned around and he told the rest of the guys, he said, "See there, what did I tell you about these boys from North Carolina?" I said, "Hughes just puts them in the same hole."
Well, what did the sergeant say when everybody was in line in basic?
You mean on the firing range?
Yeah, talking about.
Well, he said, well, before we got out to the firing range, he said the men that gets the 10, the highest 10 that gets, how did I say this? The first 10 men that gets the highest score, he said get a 3-day pass, and he said, "I'll tell you, Yankees," he said, "it won't be y'all, it'll be the boys from Kentucky, from North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky." He said, in that order. He said, "But the boys from Kentucky don't need sights on their rifle." He said, "That's the only thing they got on the people from Tennessee and North Carolina. But the guys from North Carolina will walk off with most of the 3-day passes," and sure enough, Me and 3 buddies walked off with a 3-day pass that weekend after we got off of the range.
Yeah, that's North Carolina.
Huh?
Uh-huh.